hearing each department talk about how meth affected their department, and some departments internally didn't even know how it affected them, was amazing. So we actually ended up having a sub meeting of department heads of 14 departments. So that's how many departments meth touches in the county out of about 22. We kind of did a 3-leg approach. The first one was I knew the budget was coming and I knew meth was affecting just the county budget. So where could we put our resources in order to limit the effect of that hitting the county? And all 14 department heads agreed where we needed the work, where we needed the workers to try and prevent that from spreading to the other departments. So that was huge.
So we've diagnosed a problem. How do we solve it?
Yeah, that's sort of the big question, right? So we started the meth campaign, obviously, Take a Stand Against Meth. We have a core group and 6 or 7 subgroups that are working on this. There's something called ACEs, which is really about child trauma. We're gonna really push that. We really believe that the ACEs, the trauma that kids take on when they're young, and as that affects them moving through life, it's not only meth, but it's addiction. And they can prove that the more ACEs you have, the more likelihood you are not only to be addicted to something, but also have health problems. So I think what the campaign is going to end up looking like is a big education on ACEs. First of all, how to prevent them, and then if they do happen, how to mitigate the results or the issues that come from them. I guess what really affected me when I first, literally it was like the second week I was here, I watched a video on recovery court that our CJCC coordinator put together for our Department of Human Resource Committee. And it had like 3 or 4 stories of how these individuals went through our program and recovered. And what really touched me is they talked about their kids and how their kids' lives have changed, how their lives have changed, how it was just amazing that the one got their driver's license, like just a normal thing that you take for granted, that it took them years to get that driver's license, and that they would wake up every day and go to work, and just like, I think one of the persons said, just being normal, what we consider normal, was such a big struggle for them. And then I think about my own personal life. My parents really broke a generational alcoholism in our families, essentially. And the change that they made by doing that 40 some years ago, how it affected my family, how it affected my kids. So I think, we can make that change. Generationally, it's changed. Meth has really hit hard, but I think as we move forward, we can make a positive change for a generation, and how just one person can change, 3-4 lives of their children, and then how that can expand in a bad way. It can also expand in a good way.
When you were in the force, when did you first hear about meth or have an inkling of what this drug was?
I would say in the late 80s, you started hearing more and more about meth in the Chippewa Valley, and it just grew from, over time, grew in seriousness, and the number of occasions we'd run across it increased to a point in 2004 when the Chippewa Falls Police Department joined a number of other agencies in Chippewa County to form the drug task force, the meth drug task force. Meth is just so insidious in that it's so highly addictive, even to first-time users, and the impact, physically, emotionally, socially, and every other way is really tremendous on an individual. Their whole life can, take such a spiral to where meth is so all-consuming and so difficult to get off of once you start it. I think officers were particularly disturbed by those. Number one, there was danger involved. Back in more around 2004, there was local labs where they were cooking meth that were very dangerous to enter, dangerous to be around for the officer, and also for the families. You would have kids living in homes where they were cooking meth, and the meth gets on everything, and you'd have toys and couches, chairs, all contaminated with meth, and have these children being contaminated with meth. And when it comes to kids, officers are pretty sensitive when it comes to innocent victims like that. I just got to the point where it was getting such a good toehold in our area And we had a group, the partnership group, that met regularly. It was public health people from St. Joe's, people from L.E. Phillips Treatment Center, from the county, from law enforcement, that would get together monthly and talk about a number of issues, particularly drug issues. And meth became a larger and larger focal point. And finally, we just decided that it was going to take something more than what we were doing to try to get ahead of it. And particularly, we were concerned about the demand for meth. This group wasn't going to be the enforcement arm, of course, as a group, but that would be left to law enforcement. But to try to reduce the demand by getting the public educated on what the dangers were and what the situation was became very important. So we had a very good group of people that worked hard at it. Well, it's gotten worse, and quite honestly, I've had to, being retired now from the police department for, 13 years, I do stay in contact with the PD, and had occasion to recently talk with the drug enforcement officer from the Chippewa Falls Police Department. It's really concerning to learn that it sounds good that the meth labs have really dissipated. There's not many around anymore, but now the meth is coming across directly, coming from Mexico, primarily through the Twin Cities area, and then to our area. And each step, of course, a pound gets a little more expensive, but even at that, it's so much cheaper to buy today than it was back in 2004. And the purity of it, I've learned, is 90 to 100% pure, which just makes it that much more addictive and dangerous and damaging to a person physically and emotionally and socially, occupationally, in every other way. Number one, enforcement is very important, obviously, but I think law enforcement folks agree that we can't enforce our way out of this, that it's going to take more. We certainly need to identify those that are distributing it and do everything we can to bring them to justice. But then we also have to use education of the public. We have to use treatment. We have to use deterrence through enforcement of users. And it still has to be an important part of it. But I think it'll take all of those things if we're ever going to get ahead of the curve on meth. And reducing demand, I think, is the key. I think most of the community, though they hear about it, and if you ask them about it, they say, "Oh, that's terrible." But I think, once again, I think we have to do a better job of educating the public of how prevalent it's become and how much it will affect people that they know. And I have friends that have grown children whose lives are in a spiral, not only here, but that live elsewhere because of meth use and meth addiction. I have 4 very young grandsons that I'm really concerned about the world that they're going to grow up in and what they're going to be exposed to. And I know most people my age have grandkids and would have the same concern. You're done worrying about your kids all the time, but now you're worrying about your grandkids too. And what kind of world, community are they going to grow up in, and what are they going to be exposed to? So I think more and more people are going to realize that it's creating some real problems in the area and some real heartbreak in lives. It brings you down because you become they become so preoccupied with getting more meth once you're addicted to it, which is very costly. But they have a hard time if they have a job. Quite often they end up losing their job because they don't show up for work. Sometimes it means that they spend rent money for meth instead of paying the rent, or food money. We had families that had meth labs going, that the house was a mess. There was kids in the house being exposed to the vapors and the contamination of meth, and the kids were not being taken care of, were basically being neglected. And so, it has a whole life impact on your family, on those around you, on your occupation, and quite often can turn obviously to criminal conduct, when you're not only the criminal conduct of having meth or buying meth, but also obtaining money to purchase meth and how you might do that. We've had family members that have stolen from other family members to buy meth, or have committed crimes to get money to buy meth. So overall, it's a pretty horrendous scene. It'll take the awareness at large of the community. Number one, if you need legislation passed, you need the support of your politicians that might get that done, and that comes with public pressure. It comes in the support of drug units, and the need for drug units, and maybe even expanded drug units to make sure that they're able to do their job. Treatment legislation or treatment facilities that need to be available to get those that are willing and able to break that cycle of addiction. Citizens that will report when they see suspicious things or they hear of things going on that might be signs of drug activity, criminal activity. And just for people to realize, for young people in particular, to realize what they're going to do to themselves if they experiment. And it's not a drug you can go to a party and say, well, I'll just try it once, I'm curious. It's the kind of drug where you're taking a huge risk that once won't be enough. And what might start out as once a month, go to a party, will turn into once a week, and then pretty soon you might want it every day. And I think that's largely what I hope something this would do, would just be educate the public as to the dangers, either that they need to fight the epidemic or they need to avoid becoming personally involved.
You've been around the drugs and you've experienced
Yes.
things. How did it start?
I tried marijuana a couple times in school. I've never had any like for it. There wasn't any prior, it just was, I was dealing with a loss, and, I had a couple people come around and, this will help you feel better. You don't have to worry about it anymore, and,
Is there a realization that you have that this is starting to grab a hold of me?
Not at the time. I can look back now and see those things, but at the time you really don't think about that. There's only one thing on your mind and really one thing that you care about.
And that thing is?
That thing is the drug, meth, for me. At first it makes you honestly feel like Superman. It keeps you awake, it gives you energy, you think so anyways. It makes you feel good at first, energized, like, nothing can hurt you. That wears off after a while. Then it just gets to be a lifestyle. It puts you in a different mind frame that, it makes you think you're happy all the time, and you get all these fun people around you, and it helps you escape anything bad that you want to, your mind wants to bring you to different places that are bad. It takes all that away. You get to where you don't really feel a high. It was more of just you need it to stay awake to, get through your day. At the time when you're using, you don't think it's a problem at all. You don't see what other people see. I really didn't realize it at the time, but, I started isolating, getting away from my family and my friends that were healthy because I didn't want them to know what I was doing. I started just pulling away. I stopped doing activities that I enjoyed doing. I started getting to where I was, slacking on stuff with my kids. Their school activities and extracurricular activities. I didn't have that mindset. I didn't want to be around people. I was 31. I was kind of not the norm. I had an awesome childhood. I had a college degree. And it was the one event, that loss, that just sent me on a downward spiral. When the law enforcement would start getting involved, obviously I had my kids removed from my care, not just once but twice, and at that time, in that moment I had that thought, but then it you get stuck. You don't know how to get out of that cycle, and instead you just use again, and it makes you feel better for a while again.
How do you kick a cycle like that?
For me, it was a lot of work. I was placed on probation. I was involved with child services. I also was, part of my sentence was to do, at the time it was Chippewa County Drug Court, now it's Recovery Court, which is probably what did it for me. They are a super great help. They got me into an inpatient treatment program, and that's really what did it for me. The combination of the Recovery Court team and their help, along with treatment, finally getting my family back on my side. It was a lot of support from the community even. When I got out of treatment, I easily could have fallen back into that cycle, you know, if I wouldn't have had anywhere to live, if I wouldn't have been able to get a job. Fortunately, I got really lucky, and while I was in treatment, they require you to get a job, so that kind of got you a little bit of a kickstart. Then when it was time, I was able to find some awesome landlords that were willing to give me a chance, and, you know, having a place to live is a big key. You know, and a lot of landlords, they'll look up my criminal record. Obviously, I didn't have good rent history because I was using for 6 years. I had evictions, you know. I just needed those couple people to give me a chance to be able to get on my feet and, you know, help things go uphill.
When you take stock of the effects that meth use had, what would you say to that 31-year-old who was thinking about using?
Oh, don't, you know, obviously, but you can tell people that until you're blue. They're still gonna make their own choices. Obviously, I can tell them my story, tell them the horrors, you know, I can't say there were never good times, because there was the moment, but now when I look back, those supposed good times were nothing like what I have now. It's not worth it. I lost everything. Just my spirit, mostly. I lost myself, along with material things, relationships, all of it. You lose everything.
Was there ever a time where you said that this drug is more important than my kid?
I never consciously thought that or said that. Again, when I look back, there were times I think that I probably did choose it over my kids. I was late for things a lot, or I would make excuses of why I couldn't take them places, or, you know, to events and functions. My kids were there when I was arrested a couple times. You know, that right there is obviously not consciously making that choice, but to put my kids in that situation, yeah, it happened.
Eau Claire County has now had more than 1,000 felonies so far this year, and the numbers show us year to year the number of felony crimes is growing.
He says most of the felonies are drug-related, largely tied to the area's meth problem. It says right now there are 300 people in jail, 1,400 on probation, and 1,200 active warrants. And the majority are tied to drugs.
Wisconsin State Patrol arrested 2 women in Eau Claire County.
Thorpe man is charged for planning to sell meth.
Dunn County authorities say they made the largest meth bust in the county's history.
Tuna man is facing up to 50 years behind bars after 4 children tested positive for meth after finding meth in a large duffel bag.
An Eau Claire man will serve time behind bars following the sting by the West Central Drug Task Force.
Authorities arrested a Menominee woman they say had almost 100 grams of drugs in her car.
Police say Keith Strong had 98 grams of it. Kirk Stassel sold meth to a confidential informant on 3 separate occasions.
A canine then alerted officers to the vehicle where they found a duffel bag with 7.5 kilograms of methamphetamine.
Sold more than $400 worth of meth to a police informant.
Sheriff Kevin Biggs says they found $10,000 in cash and nearly 1.5 pounds of methamphetamine with an estimated street value of $20,000.
According to the criminal complaint, the 4 kids between the ages of 10 months and 7 years old all tested positive for meth earlier this month.
Authorities say they found 95 grams of meth, plus heroin, mushrooms, and marijuana, along with $1,700.
The woman accused Carl of pressuring her to smoke meth, then assaulting her when she was high.
The 2 youngest children, aged 10 months and 2 years old, had the highest levels of meth in their system.
If convicted of all charges, Roberts could get up to 75 years.
Today, Judge Emily Long sentenced Stassel to 9 years, followed by 10 years of extended supervision.
We will not arrest our way out of this, and it is far more than just a public safety problem. It is a public health epidemic.
Through investigations, we get the information, we put it together. We'll do search warrants or make contact with the site that is suspected of having methamphetamine. And we collect the evidence as far as like the paraphernalia and the meth. At that point on, a lot of them are arrested and interviewed. We try to figure out where the methamphetamine is coming from, but we don't have cooperation all the time. Those people will end up going to court, and then they end up getting a signature bond or a cash bond, and at times face charges in the future. I know over the past several years, methamphetamine use has increased quite a bit. I would say when I was on patrol, we would see it now and then on patrol, but more so nowadays, our patrol staff is stopping vehicles and getting methamphetamine and paraphernalia from vehicles. So it definitely has increased, I would say, within the past 10 years. Methamphetamine is more prevalent in this area than any other drug. I think that's the main issue right now. But it just seems that methamphetamine continues to circle. There's some marijuana out there and some other drugs, but not as prevalent as methamphetamine at this time. The people that I have ran across, when they're on methamphetamine, they're so unpredictable. Their behavior can vary, but it also, I want to say, kind of gives them some adrenaline almost, that it makes them stronger at times. Their mental status when they're on this drug, it's not normal. I understand methamphetamine is an addiction, and when we arrest the people, a lot of them know that they need help, and at that time they say they want help, but once they get released into the community, they go back to the same friends that they were hanging around, and it just ends up being a circle. Up in investigations, I know we deal with a lot of thefts and burglaries, and a lot of those cases are related or linked to methamphetamine. People breaking into places or stealing items to either trade for methamphetamine or to get money, to pawn and get money for their habit. As law enforcement, we continue to do what we can as far as to get out there, gather information to try to get the methamphetamine off the streets. Something that would help the most would be if society in general go to any forum or anything you can to learn about methamphetamine. Go on the internet, research what the issues are, educate your children. I think the majority of it is educating our children, to let them know what it does and how bad that methamphetamine is. The general public might just see billboards of meth users, with sores on their face or on their arms, the teeth missing. But, meth users can look as normal as you and I. But that's just the long-term progression is what they're seeing with those billboards. So it's not easy to go walk out in public and say, yep, that person's using methamphetamine, because the person might look like a normal everyday person and they may be using it as well. And a lot of the dealers know that it is hazardous, and they don't want to put that in their bodies. So, there's issues with not just the meth users, but also the dealers as well. Even for us to walk in a house where methamphetamine is being used, it puts us at risk, but to know that kids are living in that type of condition, it's very sad to see that. There's two different ends of the spectrum, I guess, because we can go into a house that is immaculate and end up, locating methamphetamine, but then we've seen it where we go into a residence and there's drug paraphernalia, meth, just sitting right on the coffee table, and young kids are running around. So it's concerning at times. I hope that we can at least slow down the methamphetamine. I don't know that it's going to completely stop it, but if we make more people aware and the younger generations aware of what this is actually doing to our community, I think that would be great if the education would be out there, that we can continue and kind of pass that along to parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles to make sure that the future stays away from this drug. I don't know what the answer is to completely stop it, but I hope we can educate people enough where they choose not to use it.
Well, after it's charged out by the district attorney's office, they set up an initial appearance, but since possession of meth is a felony, they'll have a bond hearing on it. Now, the two factors on judges deciding for bond by statute is, are they going to show up for court, likelihood of reappearing, and the second one, are they a danger to the community? Most of your first-time meth offenders have no history with the legal system, so they're a good risk of coming back to court. And the second thing is they're not a danger to the community. The problem is that very few times do you have one meth case. Because it's so highly addictive, they have numerous ones. So after the 5th or 6th, you start looking at a cash bond. After the bond hearing, they'll be given an initial appearance date. It's a felony case, so you don't enter a plea at that time. You either set it for a preliminary hearing or a pretrial, and then they have a pretrial with the district attorney's office where they get a plea offer, come back to court and either accept that plea offer or set the matter on for motions and then a trial, and then after trial, it would be a sentencing at that part. Everybody who has never been involved with meth or had their family members say lock these drug people up. And what you find out is meth is so highly addictive, it takes over 120 days of sobriety to have a chance of kicking it, and almost a year of having it out of your system so there's no more cravings anymore. They just say lock them up, but what we found is they need some type of sobriety or treatment to stand a chance to get off of it. So you look at the individual, do they have that set up? What is probation and parole suggesting? What type of treatment can we give them so they don't reoffend? Because of the high addictiveness of the drug, the craving is there, and people with very low willpower usually don't have the ability to kick it on their own. So you look at that. That's the factors you take in, what's best for the individual, and usually what's best for the individual is what's best for our society. What you'll find out is the small town meth users eventually become meth dealers because of the fact that their dealers get busted by people turning on them. And the source then bypasses that individual and asks the next individual to become the dealer. And that happens quite a bit. But the judges take dealing a lot more serious because you're exposing new people who haven't had the exposure to meth to it. And we look at it as compounding the problem. So as a result, we take that into consideration for more serious sentences, with the possibility of prison depending on their history. When meth first started, everybody was cooking it in their back chicken coops and things like that. You could buy Sudafed by the truckload and no one cared about it at all. Because of the fact it was so readily available, that's how the meth epidemic started. Then the legislature made it hard for you to get the over-the-counter Sudafed, which is the main ingredient in meth, to make it. We saw a big dip in our meth problem at that time. Eau Claire saw that, Chippewa saw it, our number of cases went down. Once the Mexican cartel started importing it because it's easier to smuggle, cheaper to make, it's more highly addictive, once they started bringing it in, we saw the huge rise. We don't see the meth labs anymore. We now see the meth addicts because it's so readily available. It's more potent than it was before, and it's cheaper, is what we're finding out from law enforcement, that the cases have just exploded here in Chippewa County. The felony cases are almost double. The number of meth cases that have multiple cases are up. Our child in need of protection or services, which are usually meth children of the families, are up. Our foster children, when we take the children away from the parents on the interim basis, is up almost 400%. It affects every facet of our community. It is an explosion that we are dealing with right now. It's frustration because I have no control over it. The statutes set what we let them out on bond. The ability to try and help these individuals is small because they're innocent until proven guilty in my courtroom. And the problem is when they pick up the 5th and 6th offense for possession of meth, because they get released, they go back out and they start using again. Those are the frustrating things. The frustrating things are the parents that originally, when their children are taken away because they aren't caring for them because they're addicted to meth, who show up in tears at the first hearing, who fail to show at the 3rd and 4th hearings because someone else is taking care of their kids. They don't have to worry about them. Those are the extremely frustrating matters that I have. Additionally, the failure to appears are very high in meth cases because the people are focused on meth and not on their court dates. Our recovery court is extremely beneficial, I believe, to the people that are able to get into it. What it amounts to is this is their last chance before they go to prison. And what it's shown is they haven't been able to kick their addiction on their own. So we have a team put together for our recovery court that gives them the support that they don't have. And we all know they're going to relapse from time to time, but we're able to handle that and work through it and get them so that they can be drug-free. It's very intensive, but without the individual be willing to sacrifice what it takes to become drug-free, it doesn't work. But I'm very proud of our team. I'm very proud of our efforts and our successes that we have in this matter. The difficult cases have to deal with the highly addictive substance of methamphetamine. And what I mean by that is it just controls a person's life. They no longer care about their kids. They no longer care about their job. They no longer care about their parents. They care about getting high because it's so highly addictive. And you watch it destroy people's lives. Not only their lives, but their parents' lives, their children's lives, their spouses' lives, all of this stuff. It's just terrible to see how this drug can just destroy a family, can destroy an individual, and even destroy children who are looking for their parents and things like that. Those are the most upsetting things that I see. I've talked to a special education teacher in the local school district, and she said 15 years ago I was dealing with dyslexia and attention deficit disorder and things like that. And now I'm dealing with a whole new set of behavioral problems which are directly related to methamphetamine one way or the other. And we don't know what the extent of this is. And it could cause us a lot of problems here in the future. But that is a grave concern of what's this going to do to our society at a later time when we have kids being raised addicted to it from their parents using while they were pregnant. Obviously, the criminal justice system doesn't have the answer. Otherwise, we would have fixed it by now. It takes a community. We need everybody to get involved. We need everybody to wrap their head around this, to come up with new ideas that we haven't thought of. We don't claim to be the experts. We are looking for help from industry that they might have, from the schools, from the local health care agencies, from faith-based, from the service organizations. We're looking at everybody to put their head together and try and come up with an answer to this, to curb this. We need the education in the schools so the kids stay away from it, that they know what's going on, how addictive it is, and how it can destroy their life. So we don't have new users. We need to get rid of the call for methamphetamine in this area, the urge to people to use it. And hopefully it'll go elsewhere and we can spread this type of program elsewhere. But what we're looking for is everybody in the community to get on board to try and tackle this problem. Otherwise, it's going to tackle us.
Hey, what's up? It's an average day in the jail.
It's a holding cell. It's rubberized. More often than not, when you're placed in here, you're in a suicide smock. The bathroom is on the floor. We tend not to keep anybody in here any longer than possible. We had a guy spend 2 weeks in there one time. You know, and the only time you know what time of the day it is when you're served.
You're not gonna tell me?
Well, surprise.
Ah.
She hasn't seen her kids in about 6 months. So social worker's gonna bring one of her kids here on Monday, where she hasn't seen in a while. So it's kind of not that it's a surprise that she's going to see her son, but she just doesn't know when on Monday. So, yeah. Yesterday we had 147 inmates. You know, when you think about 147 people in a jail, not only do you have to feed them, you have to clothe them, you have to make sure that the people that are scheduled for court appearances, whether they're in our court here in Chippewa County or in another court, transportation, the work never gets done here. You never get caught up. And actually all the